name is Harold Davis. I'm here to teach you about the art and craft of digital photography.
Harold Davis is a best-selling author of many books, including his latest Creative Garden Photography from Rocky Nook, which can now be pre-ordered. He is the author of Creative Black and White Digital Photography Tips and Techniques, second edition, also from Rocky Nook. His black and white work has been collected worldwide. Harold is the developer of a unique technique for photographing flowers for transparency, the creator of multi-raw processing and hand HDR processing. He is a Moab Master and a Zeiss Ambassador. Harold is an internationally known photographer and a sought-after workshop leader. His website is digitalfieldguide.com.
So hi everyone, I hope you're doing okay. This is going to be a somewhat informal webinar compared to some of the ones that I do. There aren't all that many folks on here, and that's okay. There are three parts here. First of all, I'm going to do a inspirational slideshow, because we all need inspiration and we need slideshows. And then I'm going to work through a bunch of the techniques for creative effects post-production that I didn't get to. I have a list of them, and I have on the list, I have the pagination in the book. We'll see how many we get to, actually. Let's get started. So definitely going to do the Ansel Adams effect, and we'll definitely swap tonalities. We'll probably add soft focus, although we may not go into that in huge detail. And solarization, Blossfeldt effect, duotone, and tritone effects. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe we will do a pass on the duotone and tritone, but that depends on how long stuff takes. So here's for some inspiration. Well, my books are inspiring. Just as a refresher, here's the post-production opportunities part of Creative Black and White second edition table of contents, where most but not all of the techniques that I'll be showing you today come from. This means that you can follow along both before and after. So if you actually have the book, you can look at what I'm doing, and that might make sense. And if you don't, you can view this, you can view it again once we post it on YouTube, and you can go back to the book to see the steps written out. Yeah, this is the product code at Rocky Nook for a discount on the book. And this is another black and white book of mine. A tree reflected in the imperial gardens in the Isuin imperial gardens in Nara, Japan. A black shadow of a temple on a garden. The raking of the rock garden symbolizes water drops falling in a pond with the patterns. This is not my most famous Nautilus image, but it's a pretty nice high-resolution one and makes a very nice large size print. I have one in my that's a second from an art dealer in my living room that's about 6 feet high. Close-ups of dandelions. I'm really big on photographing things from the kitchen these days. This is a measuring spoon set. If you can't go out to see the world, well, at least you can conquer the inner space of the kitchen. And a set of mixing bowls from our pantry. A Proteus. An X-ray of a couple of Nautilus shells. This is a paper twirl. I don't remember. There was some kids' arts and craft project that had these strips of paper lying around. So I figured, well, they'll make a really nice shadow if I get up close and photograph them. Photographed on a glossy white surface with a black background generated behind them. One of the wonderful things about black and white compositions is you can create these abstractions where it's really not clear what the object is. Here, what we have is a smokestack and a ladder on a boat, and a wonderful old leaf. The top of some Queen Anne's lace, processed using the Blossfeldt technique that I will be showing you later on today. More Blossfeldian botanical details. This is a lavender, and here we are in nature's garden in Yosemite in the winter, along the coast of Oregon. Paris, the autumn sky. Somewhat unusual view of Paris out from the eaves of Montmartre. I had a garret attic roof there in Montmartre last time I was in Paris for a few days, not so very long ago, in a different world. This is a garden bench, and this is a garden in Maine in an old quarry called Schleppinghurst, which is really about the arrangements of the details, the shakes that Ken, the gentleman who built Schleppinghurst, did all himself. A complicated Photoshop composition and multiple exposure in camera. Scrolling around, right? And have a heart. So the goal as photographers is to find what matters and to find oneself through one's photographs. The classic Ansel Adams black and white processing in digital is to use the channel mixer and to hide the blue channel fundamentally and possibly bump up the red channel. So you can get at channel. First of all, I always suggest working on a duplicate layer, duplicate layer, even though a Photoshop adjustment layer will itself put in a different layer. And you can get to the channel mixer a couple of ways. One of them is through this little thing at the bottom of the layers panel, and you go down on the menu and you pick channel mixer. And so you're given an adjustment layer. And the idea here is to bump up the red, perhaps to 150% for starters. Bump up the green. Okay, my red didn't stay bumped. Go figure. And push the blue totally down to the bottom of the thing. And we'll push the green to about 144 and make sure the monochrome box is checked. And that's pretty much like an Ansel Adams kind of effect on this black and white image. Couldn't be a whole lot simpler. Let's do this again. So you can see it creates the kind of starkness that was typical of some of the big lush Ansel Adams prints, with the very blacks here and whites here. Let me, the idea generally is that the channel mixer should total 100. I mean, they're not going to shoot you if it doesn't, but you generally want this number down here, the percentage, to be 100. So you can further the like that. At 180, it's exactly right. You've got 100%. I no longer get a warning message that I'm a bad Photoshop citizen. And you use the constant slider to make the whole thing just darker or lighter. So this is the Ansel Adams effect. If you like it, you can save it as a preset. Let me show you one other Ansel Adams thing. I'm gonna go back. Okay, how do I go back to my image? I'll do this. I'll go Image, Duplicate. Okay. And now on my duplicate, I'm going to take off the channel mixer, delete layer. And okay, so we're back to my color image. Now, On1 Perfect Software has an Ansel Adams filter. So let's see what that looks like. Incidentally, you get to the On1 stuff via the Automate menu, not via the not on the Filters menu. So go figure. So On1 effects. And okay, filters, and let's see, where black and white, and there's something called Ansel in the Valley, but where did it go to? It's a good question. You can see there's some really nice black and white filters in here. For example, look at that nice one or this nice one. Maybe it's under preset, not, yeah, here we go. So I'm gonna just apply that without tweaking it at all. Okay, so here we have the On1 Perfect Black and White Ansel in the Valley filter as opposed to the channel mixer Ansel Adams settings. Any questions about this before I move on?
Yes, there's a question from Dan. He says, how did Ansel do this? A single filter?
Well, he probably did use a high contrast red filter, in fact, in photography, but his prints were pages and pages of notes and arrows and circles. They were very complicated prints to make in post-production. Not easy things to do, and not single steps, basically. It's interesting and somewhat revealing to see a sort of standard proof, what you would have got if you'd sent an Ansel Adams negative to your local drugstore processor for a print of, say, Moonrise over Hernandez, New Mexico, and it looks like nothing. But what he did out of it is wonderful. So his post-production in the chemical darkroom is magnificent, and he was working from large size negatives, which helped, and he was a kind of chemical and darkroom whiz, a master, a wizard, but these were complex images. A high contrast red filter was involved.
Didn't you spend some time in the darkroom with him?
He did give me a tour of his darkroom a long time ago, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Ronald asks, On1 seems less sharp?
Yeah, I don't know about that. You know, sharpness is a funny thing. You'd have to really, you'd have to really zoom in and compare. It may not, and keep in mind also that we are working from a very much knocked down low resolution file to make the wait time as I do this stuff tolerable here too. So I wouldn't draw that conclusion. I mean, I think there's a slight prejudice for using Photoshop's native things if they give you what you want. Okay.
Also, we're working through the Zoom webinar software too.
Yeah, I mean, this is screen resolution stuff modified for sRGB, highly low resolution, you know, without some real A/B tests at high resolution, and probably with printing pieces, I wouldn't draw any conclusions like that. One difference I see is that there's a tonal difference between the on-one version and the channel mixer version. So there's some kind of color mix in it that's slightly different in the on one version. It's not quite exactly black and white monochrome.
It almost looks like a magenta to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, for the most part in my own work, I have not used the on one Ansel in the Valley preset for black and white conversions, but I thought it was interesting to show it as long as we're talking black and white. Anything else, Phyllis?
Greg says thanks. And Dan is wondering, can you see the on-one settings used? Maybe in Photoshop? Is that the question?
Well, on one won't show you the settings once you've accepted it and gone into Photoshop. I'm not sure I understand the question, but if the question is, see these programs like On One or Silver FX Pro, which is really my favorite third-party black and white converter. They use APIs that Photoshop exposes, but they've got their own logic, and that logic is not integrated really with Photoshop. I mean, if you went and you looked at the EXIF data for this on one thing, which I'm just opening up, yeah, you know, it's gonna have a bit of stuff in it, but basically. Okay, I got the wrong one. I got the channel mixer layer 1. This one is the on one. Let's see. But it's really not going to show you much that you want to know. In fact, all it says is on one effects 10. You know, I just took the default here, but there are a million settings you can tweak in on one, but they don't translate very well to a Photoshop settings or at all to actual Photoshop settings.
Well, Dan, I think he said yes. He was wondering if it shows like on the layer name after you hit OK and it come back to Photoshop.
No, you can see the layer name here. It renames it ON1 FX10.
And then you can be a good doobie and rename it what effect you use so that you have a little bit of something for later.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. You can rename it Ansel in the Valley. And someone could say, what? Okay, so I'm going to move on. Again, this was on the channel mixer, and the discussion and settings were on page 119 of the second edition of black and white. So with this one, which is shown in my book starting on page 220, the idea here is let's get this image on black and then enhance the dynamic range once it's on black in a couple of different ways. So to put it into black, I'm going to go into LAB color. Let me get rid of my adjustments panel there because I don't think I'm going to need it for this. I'm going to make the image a little smaller. Image mode LAB. And what I'm going to do now that I'm in LAB is I'm going to invert my image adjustment, invert. Oopsie daisy. Oops, that was a mistake. So what I did, and I've done it more times in my life than I care to admit, is I inverted the entire image, not just the L channel. So like watching your P's and Q's, you have to watch your layers and channels, and whether you're painting on a mask or a layer, and whether the layer is visible or active. And little teeny icons make the distinction between these things. So we're going to back up the history panel, and we're going to go into the channels panel, and we're going to make sure that the lightness panel is selected, which you can tell by this gray bar here, and we're going to make sure that all panels are visible, and then we're going to do it again. Image, adjustments, invert. Okay. Now, if I were in front of a live class, what I would say to them is, oh, that's very nice, but do you think it might be a little bit dark? And everyone would raise their hands and say, yeah, Harold, bring on the dark. No, make it light for the flower, please. I was going to say, bring on the darkness. No, layer, duplicate layer. And now I'm going to apply a curve adjustment to the L channel. Image, adjustment, curves. And the deal here would be, you grab the curve and bring it over like that. Okay. Now, this isn't bad, except that the inner part of it is kind of too dark. So I'm going to put a layer mask, hide all, a black layer mask onto it. And we are going to take a white brush. We're going to make our white brush pretty big for this image. We're going to go like that and just do it very roughly for now. I'm going to put down the opacity to like that and paint in here too. So if you want to look at what this mask looks like, it looks like that. Okay, roughly speaking, the shape of the flower. So the next step that I would do, before I go on to my next step, I'm going to ask for any questions about this stuff.
I don't see any questions at the moment.
Everybody understands it completely in that case, and there will be a test. Just kidding. I don't know why they do that to kids. I really don't. I mean, you know, learning should be fun, and one should always want to learn. And okay, don't get me started. So to see a mask or not see a mask, you use the Alt key and click on the little thumbnail. So now I'm seeing the whole image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to layer it down. I'm going to flatten the image, and I'm going to go back into RGB before I do a black and white conversion. So let's just do a quick and dirty conversion here. I'm going to dupe my layer, and I'm going to use the default in Silver FX. So that's not bad. It's not a bad black and white image. Okay, well let's add a little pizzazz to this thing though. So I'm going to go back to my color version. I'm going to go layer, duplicate layer like that. Put it up to the top, and I'm going to add a black and white adjustment, and let's do the infrared preset. Okay, because that adds sort of knock at them. Okay, so now to paint that in, I'm going to layer down my layer like this. This one was at Silver FX neutral. Okay. And this is a IR Photoshop adjustment. Okay, I'm going to mask out the Photoshop adjustment. I'd all like that. and then paint it in at partial opacity where it needs a little bit more zip in its zap. Okay, so you have a simulated IR process on top of, where's my cursor? Here it is. On top of just a sort of default IR process. And that much pretty much does for this one. Any questions about this example? I could go.
Yeah, no questions.
Oh, good. I can go, or bad. I can go a little further. I could layer it down, and I could go layer, duplicate, layer, and I could put the duplicate into screen blending mode, and I could hide the screen blending mode, layer, layer mask, hide all, and I could start painting it in like that. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, also that I had painted in a little more in the middle that I liked, and I really want the center of my rose to be a little darker. I could go layer, duplicate layer, like that. I could pull it to the top of my layer stack. I could put it in multiply blending mode, and I could go layer, layer mask, hide all, and darken the actual center of the rose.
Ronald has a question.
Hi, Ronald.
He asks, do you use older Nik Silver effects or the newer DxO versions?
As far as I know, there ain't much difference. So mine's an older version.
Yeah, I think DxO just bought Nik, correct? And then they're just redistributing it.
Well, it's something like that. I mean, Google bought Nik, which was mostly, my understanding is, for Snapseed, for the mobile phone app, and they basically stopped maintaining the FX plugin suite, and for a while it was still there and it was free, and then they announced we're not going to support it anymore after a certain date, and everyone got agitated. I even signed a petition, please keep it. And so they made a deal with DxO, which is a French company. At some point in there, DxO went into a bankruptcy proceeding, and they didn't have much resources to do anything with it. There's some issue about some versions of Photoshop that it may not work with it, and I think the only work that they've actually done are maintenance patches for that kind of situation, but I don't think they've done any actual new work on any versions of the Nik FX suite.
Thanks, Harold.
Yep. But it's still a wonderful piece of software. I mean, the people in Nik who originally wrote it should really be congratulated. Does a lot of stuff, particularly the black and white one. I like the analog FX quite a bit, but I do find it's buggy. And I like many of the filters and color FX a lot. I still use them despite everything else that's out there. I also still use HDR FX Pro, but arguably it's no better than the HDR in Photoshop, Lightroom, or a program like Aurora HDR. You know, these things come and go. That's the only thing one can really say about them. The only thing constant in life is change, right? I used to say to my kids, well, you know, in life you don't know. It's like you could walk out on the street and a grand piano could drop on your head. Well, yeah, ain't that the truth? You know, when I was in February, when I was teaching in Yosemite, and then I was in Death Valley, and then in the Moab, Utah area with Canyonlands, Arches, and I met a couple of friends there, and we did some pretty wild things that I had no idea that was going to be my last time traveling any place for quite a while. So the moral there may be seize the day. Okay, So here are some forks. These are real working class forks that have seen some hard use, I guess. The thing is that looking at this, I would rather make the forks be distinct from the background rather than, so let's blur the background a little is my point. Layer, duplicate layer, filter, and there, here's a blur gallery. You pick your blur, but I tend to like the Gaussian blur. It's a simple classical blur. You can have more of it, you can have less of it. You can blur up to something like this and then paint it in with partial opacity. Oh, I don't know, about a 10 looks pretty good here. So let me label this as blur. Let's see, what did I say in the book about that? I said put it in at about 10%. Well, that works. Okay, so I'm going to put a hide all layer mask on it. Layer mask, hide all. You know what? In this one is better having a reveal all layer mask. So why don't I delete this one, and I'm going to go layer mask, reveal all. Okay, and now the point would be to paint my forks at 100% opacity and 100% flow out of the and then we need it to be black on the tool panel for the foreground color. Here we go, black. Got to make sure that the mask is selected, not the image. Yeah, okay. So this brush is a little bit big for the purpose, but you get the idea. And what I can then do is, if I can get my control of my mouse, it's hard doing this with figure out where one's mouse is with the zoom stuff. So I keep losing my cursor, which is not a blessing. So if I hold down the Control and Option keys, I can size my brush, and what I want to do here is make it white, so then I can paint within the tines like that. Okay. And again, I can hold down the Control and Option keys, drag the brush to make it smaller, and that's an easier way to resize things than to just guess at it. So I'm not going to make you watch while I do this entire mask, but you can see that it's not going to take that long to make it in reality. One other point here would be that you sometimes, first of all, two other points. First of all, you probably want to take down the, you want a slight blur. You don't want it knocking you on the head. So, I could take down the overall opacity, can and should take down the overall opacity of the blur layer once I have it in place. The other thing is that it might make sense to help feather the blur by creating an additional blur layer and using that to paint in just the edges with a little bit more blur than I have on the fork tines themselves. Yeah, so I said I wouldn't make you watch this, but here I am doing it anyhow. Listen to what I do, not what I say. Right, Phyllis? No comment.
I don't know what our kids say about that.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it's not bad there. Basically, as I said, I would probably take down the overall blur opacity, maybe to, I don't know, low 50s as a percentage, just by eye. And now it's there's a fairly subtle differential there. You know, again, with the blur layer at 100%, the background really does look blurred. At about, oh, you know, 56, 57%, it looks like the forks are hovering off. So essentially, by painting in a blur on a black and white image like this, I'm adding a perceptual depth of field to the whole thing. This is a low resolution version of a photograph I made in silhouette, basically, of a model named Kimmy, and it's been carefully cropped to comply with YouTube's terms of service and with my publisher's sense of decency. And forget that last comment. Anyhow, the idea of solarization is to be a simulation of a technique shown in a technique from the wet darkroom where a light was turned on as a print was being processed toward the end. So there's no such thing as digital solarization. You know, let's be clear. What you have are effects that are special effects that mimic solarization in one way or another. It turns out that LAB inversions do an awfully good job of looking like solarization, particularly if you convert the results to monochrome. So let me make a copy of Kimmy. I'm duplicating my image, not the layer. And if I put Kimmy into LAB color, and I do an inversion on all three channels, I get something like this. And in fact, I get exactly this. I can put Kimmy back into RGB. And again, let me just throw a black and white adjustment onto Kimmy. And I'll just take the auto one. There you go. So that's your first solarization. Interesting looking thing. I like it. So let me take the other version I have here on Kimmy that I haven't done anything with yet, and let me move her into LAB. And in LAB, I'm going to open the lightness channel just like that, and I'm going to do an invert on it. Now I'm going to do a second invert on all the channels. Image adjustment, invert, like that. So here we have another form of solarization. I'm going to move this back into RGB so that I can apply a black and white adjustment to it. And again, just the simplest form of black and white. So here are two possible solarized versions of using LAB color. So let me move on to another form of solarization. This is actually a color image of a mechanic's drawer in a garage. The hell drawer for a mechanic is truly a hell drawer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a sort of inverted parabola shaped curve to all the channels. And it's not so easy to get Photoshop to believe that's really what I want to do. But here it is, like this. Okay. And I'm going to layer it down, flatten it, and again, let me put it into a basic black and white image. Here you go for another kind of solarization.
Dan has a question.
Hi, Dan.
Dan would like to know with Kimmy, when you did the double inversion, is that the same as just inverting the A and B channels?
No. No, it isn't.
What would happen if you inverted the A and B channels?
Well, let's find out.
I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, so here's Kimmy in LAB, and let's see. Okay, and well, looks pretty similar to me, actually. So maybe it is the same. A little hard to tell on the Kimmy image in point of fact.
Oh, thanks for showing us, Harold.
Sure. Dan could check out the LAB webinar recordings on our YouTube site for a whole heck of a lot more about LAB. I don't see theoretically why they should be the same though, because if you in this double inversion, first I inverted the L channel and then I inverted the LAB channels, and then, well, maybe you're right. Maybe the two L's cancel each other out, and that's the same as inverting AB. Maybe I'm not sure. I I do not know. Terrible thing to admit, but that's what makes life fun, right? It actually makes some it sort of looks like it's the same, and it makes some plausible sense that it would be. This is a bottled light photograph in which an alien decided to show themselves. So in other words, sunlight is coming through a bottle of colored water, casting these shadows and refractions out onto a piece of white paper. I did a photo challenge for the wonderful Out of Chicago organization not so long ago, which showed how to do this. Phyllis and my son Nicholas helped me actually do a live footage of photographing it as well as processing it. And you can see a link to that live challenge on our website. And we're also going to be doing a webinar soon to be announced about how to do it as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go layer, duplicate layer, and I'm going to run up the Nik Color FX solarization presets. So it calls itself solarization, and the key control here is something called method. So they have 6 black and white methods, and the one that I thought worked best was method 3 here. Really, the point of these different solarization techniques, and I've shown you 3 very different approaches here, they all approximate, simulate, are kind of like solarization and the old wet darkroom, is that there's a palette of possibilities for creating interesting effects. It's not really to say one of these is correct and the others aren't. It's to say, here are many things you can do, and you might want to try them out on some kinds of black and white images. For example, I think Kimmy is definitely enhanced through solarization here. Not so sure about the alien that walks among us. I kind of liked the color version of that. But you know, keep these things in mind. Any questions about this before I move on?
No, don't see anything at the moment.
They walk among us. You know, my notes in the book say, which solarization should I use? And the important thing is to realize that none of these are real solarizations. Incidentally, even real solarizations were kind of funky, as I remember, in the sense that you know, you never knew exactly what you were going to get. I mean, if you say 2 minutes and 23 seconds into the darn thing, I turned the light on. Well, it better, if you're going to be scientific about it, it better be the same light, and you better measure that 2 minutes and 23 seconds exactly, and the developer better be the same, and so on. There's also, incidentally, a Photoshop Solarize filter, which is not very good. So these methods are all better. Okay, so let's move on. This is the view of a poppy pod, specifically Papaver somniferum, or an opium poppy. If you opened up this dried pod and found a paste in it, and you had a mortar and pestle and pasted it all together, you could eventually make some quantity of opium. And growing these poppies for decorative use is perfectly legal in this country.
If you maybe had a couple thousand poppy pods to crush, right?
Well, I don't know. I've only smoked 2 or 3 at a time myself. I don't know about you.
Har, har.
Har, har, har. The deal here, we're going to go for the Blossfeldt effect here. The deal, however, is that you want to start out with the right kind of image, because if you if you're not photographing kind of on black and head on, it's never going to look like a Blossfeldt, no matter how hard you try. So this was photographed on a piece of black velvet down there, and I use I've shown this on some other webinars. I use a bent paper clip with tape to hold the pod up in place and photograph down on it with a macro lens. First thing I'd like to do here is actually sharpen this inner part before I even worry about going to black and white. So let's do that. Layer, duplicate layer. And what I'm going to use here is the Topaz Adjust details too when I get there. Filter or preset or whatever they would like to call it these days. Detail strong 2. You know, there's something about the property of the lenses that Blossfeldt used that had selective, very sharp areas. So layer, mask, hide all. It's like with cooking, 3/4 of the battle is in the sous chefing. Well, with photography and post-production, 3/4 of the battle is in proper preparation of what you're getting to before you even do anything like monochromatic conversion. Notice that I'm turning down the opacity of my brush, and here we go. I'm just painting in a little more sharpness on these petals of my nice poppy pod here. Okay, so the next thing at this point in the process, I should say that I would always archive before I layer down, because layering down in Photoshop is one of the few things that's pixel destructive. The next thing I would do is a basic black and white conversion. So layer, duplicate layer. On this one, I'm going to use the SFX neutral. And then I'm going to put a bit of structure back on the same things we just painted in. So this is neutral. And I'm going to duplicate my bottom layer. As I've said before, it's always good practice to keep the color version at the bottom of your black and white conversion layer stack. And here we go with the second pass through Silver FX. And this time I'm going to use the high structure harsh preset. I haven't changed anything about the preset. Okay, I'm going to hide the layer mask, hide the layer again. Layer, layer mask, hide all. This is a basically increasing contrast and quote structure in the image. Once again, I would archive and layer down. So the final part of this is the tinting and special effects part where the border is added and so on. Let me point out that I've done 2 passes through Silver FX already. On each of those passes, one could have added a border. In complex image processing, it's a better idea to use each layer and pass for a separate thing than combining them together to the extent that you can. That gives you more control, enables you to keep track of what you're doing better. So layer, a duplicate layer, and once again, I'm going to go into Silver FX. And I'm going to find yellow 2 preset down here. And the yellow 2 preset puts this kind of cool, nice border around it and yellows it per the name. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate my background layer again. Layer, duplicate layer. And I'm going to go back into Silver FX again. And this time I'm going to find a preset called Antique Plate 2, which is going Antique Plate 1, which is going to add some brown and sepia and antique look into it. So this is Antique Plate 1. And I want it at about 50% opacity. However, I do note that at 50% opacity, the border has become murky and unpleasant looking, and that will not do. Does everyone agree with me? It will not do? I'll say yes at once, please. So just so I can see what I'm doing, I put my opacity of the antique plate layer back up to 100%, and I'm going to put a reveal all layer mask on it. Layer mask, reveal all, and with a brush that's set to 100% opacity and 100% flow, I'm going to, and a black foreground color, I'm going to paint out the border just like this. You can see the underlying yellow preset border coming through. And now I'm going to put the opacity of this layer down to 50%. So that's much nicer, right? It almost looks like a Blossfeldt. I will say that at least one of my Blossfeldt images, and basically you've seen the basic technique, have been mistaken for genuine Blossfeldts. It's all in the photography, basically. Any questions about this?
Yes, Gail has a question.
Hi, Gail.
Gail is wondering, when you photograph the poppy pod, why do you need to hold the pod up and not lay it flat?
Well, Gail, think about the geometry of this. So you want a solid black background behind it. If there's a way to lay it flat and you can get the camera in front of it and a black background behind it, then that's fine. But this poppy itself is a cylindrical thing with a stick coming out of it.
I think you tend to use such fancy tools such as a paper clip that's bent up so that you can put the poppy pod right on the paper clip, right?
Exactly, and Scotch tape, don't forget that.
Scotch tape, that's very important.
Yep.
Sometimes like a little geode or something to weigh it down so it doesn't fall over.
Right, and then if it's on a black cloth anyhow, you can use the cloth to wrap it up so you don't see anything of the stuff. Important in that case to use a really light absorbent velvet, and the higher quality velvets are really the best cloth for this because they reflect light the least.
I think I'm no expert. You're the expert, Harold. But I think also shooting it straight down, it would be easier to get the focal plane to be flat instead of being on an angle.
That's right. That's right.
Down.
I mean, the key thing in sharpness is to have the camera as parallel as possible to the subject. Also, there's a lighting issue. I mean, you want something like this to be lit pretty evenly, and it's really easier to do that if it's sticking up than if it were on an angle. If it were or lying down, you would need to front light it probably. I was looking not to have any great shadows here, basically.
Thanks, Harold.
Yeah, so let's move on to the to image review section at this point. And so I can go and open up Instagram. I can close down Mr. Blossfeldt if there are no further questions about him. Before the history panel of this image goes, everybody okay with this? It's in my book, so you can follow the steps there in case you need review. Okay, well, everyone, I don't know. Let's have good spirits and remember the world is a wonderful place too, because it really is. And let's take care of the ones we love, and let's try and be good people, good citizens, good hearts. And that's really all I have to say about it. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Be creative and stay mighty.